This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. We're happy to be joined in our studio by Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour. He's the current chairman of the Republican Governors Association and has earned high marks for helping Republicans around the country. He served as chairman of the Republican National Committee from 1993 to 1997, and on his watch, the Republicans captured both the House and Senate to control both houses of Congress in 1994 for the first time in 40 years. Welcome to Newsmax, Governor.
Ashley, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Just days away from the crucial midterm elections, how do you see Republicans faring? Could there be as much of a wave election now as there was in 1994 and perhaps even stronger?
Well, it certainly could be. I mean, the wind has been at our back for more than a year. The political environment, October of 2010, is better for Republicans than the political environment in October of 1994. And that has been the case for a year and a half. Still, the elections are 3 weeks ahead of us, and a week is a light year in politics.
What do you see as the most important potential GOP gains, and where and why?
Of course, I'm focused on governors. As chairman of the Republican Governors Association, and I look at about three levels of things. One is the big three states, Florida, Texas, and California. The industrial Midwest, which is clearly turning out to be a battleground. We already have New Jersey and we have Indiana. If you take Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, that is clearly a major, major battleground. But interestingly, most of the elections in New England are very close. I mean, you wouldn't think that, but a lot of people don't realize 3 of the 6 governors of New England today are Republicans: Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And almost every one of those 6 races up there, which would include Maine and New Hampshire and Massachusetts, as well as the other 3, those are very, very competitive races. And I think it just shows the Obama policies are unpopular all over the country. They've made Republicans competitive in places where we wouldn't always be competitive.
We're going to get into individual races in a moment here, but some pundits say the key to rebuilding the Republican Party lies at the state level with governorships and state legislatures. Now, they also note the importance of reapportionment and the congressional district boundaries, which will be rewritten. As head of the Republican Governors Association, how important is that and what's the impact of it?
Well, it's enormous. First of all, in 2010, we have 37 governor's races. So that, first of all, makes this an unusual year. The year I was elected, 2003, re-elected in 2007, there are only 3 governor's races. In 2008, there are only 11. Last year, there were only 2. This year, there are 37. So just by the dint of numbers. But because this is the year of the census, it means that the governors elected this year will preside over redistricting, and every state house, every state senate, and the United States House of Representatives have to be redistricted and or reapportioned. Governors in 39 of the 50 states have a role in redistricting, and so it is important who your governor is for state policy, for taxes, for economic growth, but also because the governor's got a role in redistricting. And finally, of course, governors elected this year will be governor in 2012 when we have the next presidential election. So it is a very important year. Let me just, without filibustering, actually say this. When I was chairman of our party from 1993 to 97, governors like Tommy Thompson in Wisconsin and John Engler in Michigan, Carol Campbell in South Carolina, you could go all across the country from Bill Weld in Massachusetts to Pete Wilson in California. They were the most influential, most popular people in our party. And the legacy of that's welfare reform. If you take the welfare reform law passed in 1996, signed by President Clinton after he had vetoed it twice previously, that law was written by Republican governors, it was driven by Republican governors, and it was the product of policy that had been instituted in the states by Republican governors. That's what many of us had thought we should have done about health care reform, the way we did welfare reform. Let the states implement some reforms, pick from the best of that. And believe it or not, Ashley, there are a bunch of Democrat governors who thought that too at the same time. Instead, we get Obamacare, which is a government-run health care system that's going to drive up the cost of health care.
Right now, 24 Republican governors, 26 Democrat governors. What are you predicting in terms of pickups on Election Day?
Well, I'm smart enough not to try to predict too much about what the electorate's going to do, but I'm going to be disappointed if we don't have at least 30 governors when we come out of the November 2nd election. And I think we'll make gains in every area of the country.
Okay, New Jersey's governor, Republican Chris Christie, very colorful. He's shaken things up really in that very, very blue northeastern state. He's declared a state of fiscal emergency. He slashed state subsidies. He took on the unions, and he even locked horns with at least one reporter. Do you think Christie should be the model for other newly elected Republican governors?
Well, I'll tell you, Chris Christie, who was elected last year, and Bob McDonnell, who was elected governor of Virginia last year, are doing exactly what the American people want. Both of them came into office facing huge state budget deficits. What they did is they addressed it not by raising taxes, but by cutting spending, by getting control of spending, by reform of state government to make state government smaller, not bigger. In Washington, all we see is more spending to give the government more power and control over our lives. With the Chris Christies, the Bob McDonnells, you see the Republican alternative, and that's smaller government equals a bigger economy, lower taxes and less spending. We're really pleased with what both Christie and McDonnell have done, because all over the country, there are Republican gubernatorial candidates this year who are campaigning. Elect us and we'll focus on jobs and the economy. We will get control of spending. We won't raise taxes. We'll get the deficit and debt. These are the things that are on the American people's minds, and they're things our candidates are campaigning on. The Democrats' answer isn't to run on their record. You don't see Democrats saying, oh, you know, here's all the great stuff we've done. Do you know that in the U.S. House of Representatives, there's no Democratic candidate for the House who's running a TV ad about health care reform unless he voted against it? And he is saying, hey, I didn't vote for it. Don't blame me. I didn't vote for it. Well, we've got guys who are running on the idea of jobs, the economy, and lower spending and smaller government. And they can point to Chris Christie and they can point to Bob McDonnell and say, this isn't just talk. The Democrats want to say, we won't do this. Well, here are two guys who are doing it, and the rest of us will do it too.
Specific gubernatorial races. Let's start with New York. Democrat Andrew Cuomo has a comfortable double-digit lead over the Tea Party-backed Republican Carl Palladino. Where do you see that coming out?
Well, I think Palladino shook the race up. I mean, Cuomo had a huge, huge lead for months and months and months. And then out of the clear blue sky, Palladino beats Rick Lazio for the nomination. Palladino's been given the Conservative Party line. Yeah. Cuomo's still the favorite in New York, and he's still got a double-digit lead, but this race is a lot more interesting than it was before Carl Palladino became our nominee.
South Carolina Republican Nikki Haley, who has Tea Party credentials and the backing of Sarah Palin, is holding her lead over Democrat Vincent Shaheen, although Democratic Party pollster Hamilton Campaigns has cut her lead in half now from 10 points to 5 points.
Now, polling is an inexact science. It is reliable only within a range. But Nikki Haley looks very strong. She's got the party unified behind her. And the people of South Carolina are not about to elect somebody who supports President Obama on health care and on the stimulus package like Vincent Shaheen has done.
In Florida, you funneled $2 million into the gubernatorial campaign of Republican Rick Scott, who's running against the state's chief financial officer, Alex Sink. What impresses you about Scott?
Well, look, here's a guy who wasn't even thinking about running. He's a businessman. He's never run for office. Came out of the clear blue sky, won the primary against a very popular, very successful attorney general who's had a great record both in Congress and as attorney general.
Bill McCollum.
Yeah, that's right. Beating McCollum in the primary is impressive. The second thing, he has been very focused on jobs, the economy, spending, taxes, the size of government. And in most of the recent polling, he's got a small lead. It's going to be a competitive race. There's no question about that. But I think the odds clearly favor Rick Scott today.
Very interesting race. In Michigan, a very blue state with a huge union influence, Republican Rick Snyder is up on Democrat Verge Bonero by nearly 20 points. How do you explain that?
Well, of course, we got a great candidate. Rick Snyder turned out to be far and away our best candidate. He won in a four-way primary with some very serious, well-regarded opponents. They quickly united. Michigan is dying for change. Michigan's got the highest unemployment in the country, serious problems, and the Democrats have nominated their most left-wing candidate. When we were nominating a businessman who's conservative but who's really focused on jobs, they're nominating far and away the farthest left-winger that they had, and that's why it looks good today. Not over till it's over, but as you say, Rick Snyder's had a 15-20 point lead for several weeks now.
Arizona. Incumbent Governor Jan Brewer still leads the Democrat, the State Attorney General Terry Goddard, by comfortable double digits. Brewer supports the state's immigration enforcement law. Goddard does not. In your view, is that the difference in the race?
Turning the race totally upside down. Of course, you know, Governor Brewer was not elected governor. Janet Napolitano became a member of the cabinet, and Governor Brewer became acceded to governor.
That's quoting the state constitution.
That's right. So where she was Secretary of State. They don't have a lieutenant governor out there. So at any rate, she wasn't elected. So she had primary opposition. She had a lot aimed at her. That Arizona immigration law, which is good policy, particularly for a state like that is on the border, when she supported that, it got passed and the Democrats attacked it. Everybody in Arizona recognizes that this needs to be done, that this is just reasonable enforcement of the current law, that if the federal government isn't going to enforce the law, then somebody else has to enforce the law. And so she has been, as we say at home, she's been strong as an acre of garlic ever since that's passed, and I think I don't see that subsiding.
All right. Colorado governor's race, all right, a three-way affair with former U.S. Representative Tom Tancredo running as an independent. As such, the Republican vote is split two ways. Now, does that look as though Tancredo, in effect, is handing the governor's mansion to Democrat John Hickenlooper, who's up by double digits?
There's no question it helps Hickenlooper. It helps the Democrat. But let me just use that as a little bit of frame of reference. The worst thing that could have happened to conservatives and Republicans this year would have been if the Tea Party activists had chosen to run as independents or as third-party candidates like Tancredo is doing here. Instead, they chose to run in our primaries. And we welcomed them in Republican primaries. They won some, they lost some. But that is so much better for the conservative movement and for the Republican Party that the Tea Party candidates ran in our primaries, are part of our party, and Colorado makes the point that when you split the conservative vote, that's Barack Obama's fondest prayer, to see the conservative vote split.
Are you disappointed in Representative Tancredo?
Not really. I'll be honest with you. We had trouble in our own primary, and that guy who was supposed to be the strongest candidate had some very serious problems at the end. Turned out to not be a very good candidate. So I don't think it's fair to say Tom Tancredo is to blame. I don't think that's fair to him.
All right, California, the big one. Former Governor Jerry Brown, who wants to be governor again, continues his single-digit lead over former eBay CEO Meg Whitman. Is that one still in play for the Republicans?
Oh, sure it is. It's still in play on a variety of levels. First of all, this maid business about the illegal immigrant maid is so transparently put up by Jerry Brown and his supporters that while I think it knocked Meg Whitman back at first, I think at the end of the day, the public sees through that so vividly, particularly now that a Democrat in the next state has tried to pull the same stunt on his Republican opponent in Nevada. The other thing is turnout dynamics. In midterm elections, about 70% as many people vote as voted in the previous presidential election. And the big issue, normally the biggest variable in midterm elections, which 70%? And so you take a poll of 100% of the electorate, but only 70% of them vote when you see which 70% it is, it can move those numbers quite a bit. And it's clear right now the intensity on the Republican side is much higher. The Democrats and the labor unions are trying to make that up with money. They're pouring money into the street to get their supporters who are not particularly motivated, and just to go get them and drag them to the polls for early voting. And that's a big part of their campaign plan, and that's why the viewers need to realize that the left is going to outspend conservatives in this election, and so Republicans can't take anything for granted.
Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, also chairman of the Republican Governor Association. A pleasure to talk with you, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ashley, very much.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.